Oh lord, I hope I'm not too outdated talking about cyberpunk right now, because I am really curious. How punk is cyberpunk? Let's start our journey by exploring my favorite thing, the root of the word. I'd like to start with the word punk, which is a suffix in the cyberpunk variables, and just by learning the word punk itself gave me an interesting story to share with you. Fun fact, the word punk was once used with the same meaning as the word prostitute. For example, in the work of Shakespeare's The Merry Wife of Windsor in 1602, this punk is one of the Cupid's carriers. Punk here is a slang for prostitute. Then this word was somehow developed in a weird way. The meaning transferred from just prostitute to a man who is forced to have sex with another person in jail, or to petty criminals or worthless, inexperienced youth, as we applied the word as an insult to generally whoever younger than us. Damn, punk, you sure been through a lot, eh? But if you ask people nowadays, then we are more likely to think of punk as a music genre or as a fashion style like this. The usage of the word punk as a music genre, punk rock, was evident in Cream magazine writing about ? and the Mysterian in 1971. The term was coined by Dave March before it became popularized in 1967 when Punk magazine used the word as their title. The birth of the 70s youth music punk rock derived from the 60s garage rock bands. During that time, as a consequence of World War II and the Vietnam War, a lot of young people were unemployed or earned insufficient amounts of money. The economy was stagnant. Therefore, these young people shared the belief that there was no future for them. So, mostly because there was no hope and there was nothing else to do, people joined in this punk rock community. Punk rock was a way to express the hopelessness and disappointment the government and war gave them. The punks rebelled against the establishment, while many of them were also anti-capitalism. For example, some went against rock music since it was being commercialized due to its popularity in that era. Some may see punks as losers or teenagers who just rebel for fun. Some may see them as a group of people with determination. Of course, both types existed. Who am I to judge? They created a rough style, usually fast-paced songs, and published them through informal channels, distancing themselves from record labels. They wore ripped shirts, torn jeans, all clothed with safety pins, which expressed their desperation and poverty. Oh, what an irony. On the other hand, the word cyberpunk was coined by a writer named Bruce Becky. He created this new term for his short story Cyberpunk in 1983. The story was all about teens, hacking system, rebelling and stuff, which was quite similar to the public image of the rebellious punk rock teenagers. Shortly after the publication of Becky's novel, the word cyberpunk was popularized by William Gibson's Neucromancer in 1984, set in the future Shiba City, Japan. Time after time, the popularity of cyberpunk escalated, and it gradually developed itself as a distinctive genre. Now we can define cyberpunk as a genre of science fiction set in a lawless subculture of an oppressive society dominated by computer technology. It often emphasizes the low life of people. There is a greater number of people in poverty than the elite, and usually the elite exploits the system, leaving the poor to struggle even though the technology is extremely futuristic and developed. There are many famous works from this genre such as Blade Runner 2049, Elysium, Ready Player One, Alita, Ghost in the Shell, Detroit, Cyberpunk 2077, Altered Carbon, and Love, Death, and Robots. Then this genre became widespread like wildfire. It gave birth to many more cyberpunk variables, both the well-known ones and the ones that are kind of niche. Here are the examples. Steampunk, the retro future, mostly based on the 19th century, where everything seems to run by steam power. Dieselpunk, the future developed mainly on diesel-based technology, especially for military. Biopunk, a dystopian setting where technologies are developed focusing on biotechnology. Even ones that don't seem to fit in this dark or depressing theme may as well use this suffix punk in their name. Like atompunk, a technological nuclear power-based theme with bright colors, expressing the optimism of the future that humans can solve everything. And lastly, even a super positive theme like the utopian eco-friendly world solarpunk exists. So, even though all of them contain the word punk, do they really have anything to do with the 70s punks? Do punk and cyberpunk variables the same? According to my little research, I'd say yes and no. Let's start by exploring cyberpunk, the beginning of the whole variables first. Well, I think it is clear that you don't need to be listening to punk rock music to join the cyberpunk community. Likewise, if you love cyberpunk, it doesn't mean that you are now a punk. You may want to point out that people can differentiate punk and cyberpunk aesthetic quite easily. However, for me, despite their trademark looks, both punk and cyberpunk do not really have a fixed style. Like, you don't need to dress like this to listen to punk rock. Also, punk can be perceived by some groups as a philosophy or a way of life rather than just music or fashion. In the same manner, not all cyberpunk things need to be filled with bright neon colors if we look by the definition of the genre. Still, if you want to say that people usually have a distinctive image in their head, then yeah, punk and cyberpunk are different in that way. Despite the general conceptualization, and considering that Big Hit took the name from the music genre itself, both punk and cyberpunk share some characteristics. These 4 characteristics are what I believe common among punk rock ideology and cyberpunk. Number 1. Dystopian theme. Mainly, both cyberpunk and punk music are related to the story of a shattered future. The story of a dystopian world, a world that despite the evolution of all the high-tech facilities the world has to provide, people, especially ordinary ones, need to struggle just to survive. After the World War II, Britain, as well as America, Japan, and many other countries faced a hyper rate of inflation and flat economic growth around the 1970s. This phenomenon was called the stagflation since the economy was stagnant during high inflation. Due to the economic crisis, many people lost hope if they would have a brighter future at all. A number of them rebelled and expressed their feelings or opinions through punk rock songs, for example, God Save the Queen by Sex Pistols, criticizing British politics and expressing their anarchist point of view. Straight to Hell by The Clash, which against the Vietnam War, Know Your Product by The Saints, which talking about consumerism. Besides, they also have other songs that mention other issues like drugs and the LGBTQ community. The dissatisfaction may not be the only reason why people decided to join punk rock, but the boredom of being unemployed seemed to amplify the punk rock popularity. From the cyberpunk side, we have an evident example from Ready Player One, and I mean the book version. It doesn't mean that the setting in the movie version does not look depressing enough. It did a good job in providing us with a basic idea of how the protagonist's residence, the Stacks, looked like, but the living condition of Wade in the book version was way more desperate. There was the mention of gunfire, a few screams, and the extreme need for space and privacy, which is not seen or not portrayed as extreme in the movie. Here are a few paragraphs from the first chapter of the book. I was jolted awake by the sound of gunfire in one of the neighboring stacks. The shots were followed by a few minutes of muffled shouting and screaming, then silence. Gunfire wasn't uncommon in the stacks, but it still shook me up. I was curled up in an old sleeping bag in the corner of the trailer's tiny laundry room, wedged into the gap between the wall and the dryer. I wasn't welcome in my aunt's room across the hall, which was fine by me. I preferred to crash in the laundry room anyway. It was warm, it afforded me a limited amount of privacy, and the wireless reception wasn't too bad. And, as an added bonus, the room smelled like liquid detergent and fabric softener. The rest of the trailer reeked of cat piss and abject poverty. Number 2. Income inequality. During the stagflation in the 70s, the rich who had the power to raise the price of their own products or services would just be richer, while the others needed to remain poor. Similarly, cyberpunk often portrays a tremendous gap between social classes, which could be related to the situations that punks had faced. The authorities and the elites represented in the cyberpunk genre are crazily rich and privileged, as they can't access anything their heart wishes. Well, as we know, the exact opposite happens to the poor or even to ordinary people. The latest scene I've watched and could be used as an example is from MCU's Loki series. The whole series is not cyberpunk, yes, but I believe many of you would agree that there is one episode where almost everything was very typical cyberpunk. Spoilers alert for those who have not watched the series and are trying to avoid spoilers, so you can skip this part to the next example. Okay, so on a moon named Lamentis 1, the land filled with blue and purple color, where the moon was nearly crushed by its planet, the tickets to escape this dire situation were all in the hands of the elites, and the rest was left to their early fate, to die. Another clear example would be from Altered Carbon, set in the world 300 years from now, where everyone could be revived in a new body if they have ship and, of course, money. The rich can have any form of body they wish, or they can even clone their previous body and live as long as they want. On the contrary, the poor may revive them for an early one time in a poor quality body. Another one is from Elysium. As you can see, this one is where the rich live, a beautiful place in space with healing machines that can heal everything in a few minutes. This picture is from the Earth where the poor live. Yup, that's definitely the definition of high-tech, low life. Number 3. The rebellions. As we all know, punks are rebellious by nature. They show that they do not conform to society through everything possible, from their clothing, music, lyrics, to their actions. Cyberpunk media often shows a society where moral code of the government or corporation is questionable. For example, a massive armed company named Arasaka Corporation seemed to dominate the world in our Cyberpunk 2077 game. In Blade Runner, replicants, the bioengineered creatures used as servants and soldiers, created by Tyro Corporation, later by Lawless Corporation, could be found on Earth even though it was illegal. These big corporations are so powerful that most of the time their government couldn't do anything to them. As a result of the disparity between social classes and questionable authorities, it was not only punks that rebelled against the elites, but also the people in cyberpunk settings. In a short animated film, Blade Runner Blackout 2022, there were groups who went against the Tyro Corporation and the existence of the replicants. When the Nexus 8 model had a natural lifespan unlike the previous version, it reinforced the fear among humans that the replicants would become a threat to humanity. Therefore, people aggressively rebel by hunting and killing these replicants. Furthermore, there are other rebels in other films and games too. In Altered Carbon, there was Neo-Catholicism who refused to be revived in a new body after death. Mobs and rebels also existed in Detroit, whether the human rebels against the AI or android rebels against oppression. Number 4. Individualism. Last but not least, we are going to discuss the idea of DIY or do-it-yourself and how it is similar between punk rock and cyberpunk. Punks are commonly known for their do-it-yourself ethics. It was shown through their independent production published by themselves, using all music gears. Some of the clothing was also redesigned by themselves using whatever materials they could afford, like safety pins, or they could just wear ripped stuff. Do-it-yourself doesn't only mean the physical action of doing something by yourself. Apart from the appearance, their call is also to be individualistic and be themselves, or sometimes it can be expressed as, I don't care about anyone. Observing the cyberpunk movies, you can occasionally see characters fixing something themselves and be acquainted with unofficial or local, often illegal services, especially cybernetics healthcare. For example, in Alita the Battle Angel, Dr. Ido picked her up and repaired her from pieces in the scrapyard. We have Reprodox Clinic in the Cyberpunk 2077 where the doctors will replace or modify your body parts to, hopefully, a better condition. There are several clinics for you to select. Some are well known to be good, but they might trade some illicit cybernetics also. In the aspect of their ideology, even though it is not a punch right into your face, it is not hard to notice that they support individualism, self-expression, and oppose oppression. So yeah, in these 4 aspects, punk and cyberpunk are not that different. Now, how about the other variables? Well, they might have something in common with the ideology or theme of 70s punks, but those resemblances are not prominent, hence not straight away noticeable. For instance, one thing that they have in common is that all of them talk about the future, but those futures are portrayed in various ways according to the theme. Apart from that, there are some features we could count as similar among cyberpunk wearables and the 70s punks. Diesel punk arts often mimic war propaganda posters used in the 1940s. Some steampunk fashions seems like they are from the post-apocalypse and are DIY. Like clinics and oppressive government are trademark characteristics of biopunk. Nonetheless, unlike the cyberpunk genre, most of these subgenres do not share many traits with the typical punks. Also, Rococo punk, a theme I plan to research in depth later, demonstrates a lot of corrupted classhole. So if you are interested, please subscribe and stay tuned. To sum up the similarity of punk and cyberpunk, protagonists in cyberpunk settings and the 70s punks live in and go against similar living conditions. They lean towards individualism and go against establishments or organizations. Still, apart from their general appearance and aesthetic, punk and cyberpunk are not the same things. Punk rock focuses more on self-expression, rebelling against establishments and rebelling against what deems to be disappointing, which is often government and mainstream or society in general. Cyberpunk is also quite bitter about society, but they are more subtle about the concept of liberty and individualism compared to punk rock rebels and music. They often fight an evil corporation, sure, but Cyberpunk reflects more of how society would be if the world continues to develop in the way it has already been, a super high-tech world with the problems of income inequality and extreme capitalism. If you enjoyed this, please click like and share so there will be more videos like this in the future. If you wish to listen more about Rococo Punk, please click subscribe to my channel so you don't miss it. Thank you for being with me today. For those who are waiting for the next chapter of the Mad Scientist series, it will be up after this video, probably 2 or 3 weeks after this. I really need to take a break so that I could go back to our good old Mad Scientist with a fresh mind. Thank you for understanding, and until next time, see you everybody.